So, yeah, pretty.
Yeah, good to go. Right, everyone, good afternoon. Thanks for coming here today. It's great to see a group of old friends, former scholars, new applicants, even one of our ambassadors here, Doug Hall. Thanks very much to Doug. Doug makes a financial contribution to support Mancal's program. And big hello to Nicola from Liberty Works as well. Wonderful to have you along. So we run these seminars here at Mancal to give an alternative perspective, something that you might not get in your university career, that's meant to complement your university education and your own sort of personal development. Now, we run these on a weekly basis at the moment, and so keep a good eye out for notifications of the following ones coming up. We have many interesting ones today. I'll introduce you to our speaker in a second. Today is one of the most interesting we've had yet. You all know that we run our student scholarship program, and we're really keen on people coming to these seminars and then making application to these scholarships. We send dozens of great students around the world every year to conferences and internships to learn more about markets and trade and why the world is as it is. We have former scholars here today smattered around the rooms. Welcome to you guys who've already been on internships. Yeah, we're basically come along to these events and then make sure you talk to Kate, who's our scholarship coordinator. She's not here today, but have a chat to her, and we just have so many opportunities going. We love to hand them out. We're always looking for good people to put their hands up. So today I'd like to introduce you to Nick Hubble, who's a leading anarcho-capitalist, here to talk to us about an introduction to anarcho-capitalism. So he's right on the money and will know exactly what he's talking about. Nick has a long history with Mancal. He and Ron actually were on the free market roadshow in Europe together in 2015. So Nick is absolutely full bottle on what this is. Now, some of you may already be into a bit of anarcho-capitalism. Some of you may have absolutely no idea what it is. And Nick's here today really to sort of give that introduction and talk through it a bit more. Nick is a financial advisor as well, as I understand, so so get some. So not only is he qualified, not only does he know his stuff, he's actually qualified. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Nick to what I think is going to be probably one of the most fascinating seminars we've had yet.
Pressure's on.
Please welcome Nick.
So first of all, some of you have done the readings on the Facebook side. I didn't put those up, I didn't suggest those. I've had a quick look at the titles. And did most of you watch them and read them? Or yeah? So the first one was Privatize Everything, right? And for the record, I disagree with privatizing much of anything, because the last thing I think people should do is buy a business that the government has been running. It sounds like a business recipe for disaster to me. We know that most privatizations might work better than the government, but do we know that they work particularly well? I don't think so. I think there's lots of examples to show that privatization is probably better than government, but not very good. The better option is to do things like Bitcoin, where you outcompete the government. You start something new, you try something different. That's why usually the government bans competition. All right? If you believe what government says, they say we need to do X, Y, and Z. Why do they stop you from competing? Why do they stop you from competing against all the licensing regimes in the world about this? All the financial services licensing regimes, which I've become part of again as of about 2 days ago, after 2 years not being compliant. That's to stop people from competing with the government-approved version of things. And let me tell you, we are only allowed to say what the government says we're allowed to say, regardless of whether we think it's right or wrong. Medical licensing, banking licensing. Right? Why does the government ban competition if what they're offering is better? All that people like me really want is to say, look, we should allow competition. We think the private sector can do a better job of things like issuing money, Bitcoin, providing healthcare, providing schools, homeschooling is a good example. We think the private sector can do a better job. Privatizing, privatization is really easy to fight against for people who say it's a really bad idea because reason 1, 2, 3. Privatization is a bit of a red herring. Maybe in the particular video, which I haven't seen, they sort of agree with me more than I'm accusing them of. Maybe they don't really mean privatize everything the way we understand it. Maybe they just mean competition as well. Why I'm a libertarian and is government really necessary? There are two ways of approaching this. I have a different way that I want to take you through today, and it's basically a journey. So that's why I call it backwards introduction. So I'm not going to tell you what it is until very much later. I'm going to explain to you how I became an anarcho-capitalist. The idea being that nobody really believes in this particular ideology from the outset. I'm pretty sure nobody ever has. It's a pretty weird one. The way people become an anarcho-capitalist is basically like a slow descent into this particular ideology, which makes it more interesting because I can't persuade any of you. I seriously doubt anyone has ever persuaded anyone else to become an anarcho-capitalist. It just doesn't work that way. You very slowly convince yourself. And I'm going to try and start that journey for you in a little bit of a fast forward mode, which means each of you hopefully will research 2 or 3 things. Hopefully the things that you really disagree with me about, and you do a little bit of deeper reading. Don't bother doing all of them, just do the ones you're interested in. And hopefully I've sort of kick-started the journey and given you lots of points of entry to begin that journey. That's why it's a backwards introduction. Why should you care about anarcho-capitalism? As I'll say later on. Hello Ron, how are you? Ron, are you an anarcho-capitalist?
Yeah.
Yes, you said it very quietly.
Every day I become more and more one.
So anarcho-capitalism is not very useful in terms of an ideology. It just annoys people. Usually annoys them a lot. But it's incredibly useful because it illuminates your way of seeing the world, especially through economics and making economics useful. For example, our superannuation system. I used to write about why the government is going to steal all of our super. That was my financial advice a few years ago in my retirement letter. You should set up your own retirement system outside the super system because based on simple demographics, the super system is not going to work, just like pension funds in Illinois aren't working. That's been in the news at the moment. And the reason the government set up the super system is because all the assets are now in there, and it's going to be easy for them to ration how you get your money out. They're already doing it by slowing down the lump sum payments and taxing them, and they're going to restrict even more as time passes. So becoming an anarcho-capitalist allows you, I'm going to say ANCAP because it's too much of a mouthful, becoming an ANCAP will help you to predict what the government's going to do. And right now especially, that's the #1 factor in just about everybody's lives, especially their financial life. You know, we can't really do much of anything, including across the road, that's jaywalking, smoking in certain places. You'll start to see the world differently, and it can be useful in that sense, especially for your financial life, which is what brought about my career in financial services. So I was at 2 investment banks during the financial crisis. One gave me a scholarship, one was an internship, and basically, I didn't say it because we're on camera, but I didn't want to work there anymore. I saw them at their worst, and the people who did predict the crisis were financial newsletter writers. Because they don't have advertising revenues, they can say whatever they want. Certain newsletters don't have advertising revenues, therefore they can say whatever they want. That's why they're allowed to predict the financial crisis.
If I can interrupt, if you want to tell the real story, I can edit that out.
That's okay. I'm sure everyone can imagine the sort of one. It was in the news at the time. Anyway, besides they gave me a scholarship, so I did it nice. So that's my job, writing about these sorts of things, using these sorts of theories. Usually we don't say that we're anarcho-capitalists or libertarians or whatever we might be. We just use the economic theories, and as you'll discover, it's just basic logic, really. It's just that we follow it through to a conclusion. So let's get started into the actual speech. Let me start with a question to you. Why do we need governments? Why do we have governments? Just blurt stuff out. I'm not going to start picking on that. Why do we have governments? What are they for? If we didn't have governments, what would happen? Anybody? Crime? Stop crime? Yeah.
Protect our borders.
Protect borders, yeah. Who are you protecting the borders from? Other governments, right? There's your answer. Well, the textbook answer is that we have governments for something called public goods, something that only the government can provide or only the government can provide properly. Lots of examples like lighthouses, roads, schools, all sorts of things that we need the government to do. either because the public sector wouldn't do it, or the private sector wouldn't do it, or couldn't do it. And there's lots of reasons why the private sector might not be able to do it, such as pollution. So no one owns the air we breathe, therefore a private company can get away with air pollution as much as they want. It's called tragedy of the commons and externalities. There's the free rider problem, which is if a private sector built a lighthouse, then how are they going to make money out of it? Because all the ships just go past without paying. Free rider problem. Safety, who would care about workplace health and safety if the government didn't write laws? And monopolies, we've got to prevent monopolies because they can price gouge all the rest of it. What are some examples of public goods? I've just given you some. So the biggest example of lighthouses, of public goods is lighthouse, because that's the original example. So about hundreds of years ago, the first textbooks or treatises of economics were written by economists like John Stuart Mill, Henry Sidgwick, Paul Samuelson, Arthur Pigou, and they all used lighthouses to explain public goods. That was literally the textbook example for hundreds and hundreds of years. The reasoning is easy. I've explained some of it. The free rider problem, who's going to bother building a lighthouse? How are they going to make the money? How can they charge people? Lots of other problems related to lighthouses, and economists explain those problems using lighthouses specifically. And then in the 70s, an economist called Ron Coase came along and decided to research the history of lighthouses to see if it was all true, and it wasn't. Basically, the majority of lighthouses were privately built and run. In fact, they were so profitable that the government took them over because there was public outcry, because they were making money off the public safety, which was outrageous. Making money off safety is wrong. So the Trinity House took them all over gradually. And I think the key quote is at the bottom of the lighthouses, and 34 have been built by private individuals. Then Trinity House took them over. Now, the whole story is a bit more complicated than that, but the point was that the textbook example of a public good, something that only the government could provide for various reasons, is just wrong, based on history, based on fact. So that's lighthouses. So people reading that thought, oh, this is a bit odd. Some things that are public goods, actually, the private sector can do quite well. Who will build the roads? That's an even more basic textbook example of a public good, because the private sector can never build roads. How would they charge people? Who would pay for it? What happens if you want to build a road somewhere but someone owns the land and they don't want to sell to you? There's like thousands of objections that people come up with to explain why only the government could build roads. So I went to a conference in 2012 called the Mises Seminar. I think it was in Sydney. One of my friends and Ron's friends organised much of it. I'm guessing Ron was there too. You were with the Workers' Party. So there was the keynote speaker there called Walter Block. Has anyone heard of Walter Block? Yeah, there's a much better introduction to anarcho-capitalism than the readings, because it's an issue by issue basis that he follows. You should go watch the video. It's very amusing, very funny. He basically explains who would build the roads if the government did. He has all sorts of weird theories, a few examples, and he combats all of the arguments, and he always reverts to a question and answer pretty quickly because he likes to do things on his feet a bit more. It's very funny. So I was sitting in this speech listening to him, and I'd heard it before because I watched the YouTube video, and the guy next to me was scoffing and laughing and like shaking his head. And after the speech I introduced myself, and what do you do for work? And he said he builds roads. That's why you didn't like the speech, because you work for the government. And he looked at me and said, no, I don't work for the government, I build roads. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, in lots of parts of Australia, the government rules for building roads don't work because it's too hot or too cold, or too much sun. The road trains, the cattle trains, road trains are too heavy, so the base, the maintenance costs are too high if you build it in a particular way. So he goes out and builds these roads for companies out there against the government's law, against the rules. Because it's on private land, you can get away with it. So there you go. Australia leads the world in privatised roads. And my friend Buddy is the guy actually physically doing it. He also said most of Walter Block's theories are wrong and explained this is how we overcome the various objections, which just shows there's many different ways to do it. So there's that's one place. Australia is a great place for privatised roads. The Guardian newspaper, the British newspaper, wrote about a charter city in India. Charter city is the city without government rules, without a government council. The companies solve the problems themselves. There's no laws that are made about what happens. At least there used to not be. The government's again trying to take them over. But there's the quote there at the bottom. If we left it to the government, it would never get done. So if you drive to this particular city, I don't know the pronunciation for it, apparently, if you drive to the city, it's terrible roads, awful roads, lots of potholes. It's a disaster. And then all of a sudden, the road's lovely, flat, maintained. That's where the cutoff is, where the government's road is, and where the private city's road is. The private city has to maintain the roads well, otherwise they can't make money. The government, their revenues are completely unrelated to whether the road's good. That's why they don't bother. Fair enough, that's comparing India's government to the private system. Hopefully we'd do better than the Australian private system. Obviously our government's better. So that made me question roads. So we've got the professor explaining how the private sector could build roads, and we've got my friend actually building them in Australia, and there's the cities in India which are doing a pretty good job of building roads in a private society, close to a private society. What about schools? Who would provide an education to poor people if we didn't have government-provided schools? Wealthy people can probably go to a private school. They already do, a lot of them, although those schools probably get a lot of school government funding as well. Who would give poor people an education? They obviously can't go for it.
Oh, charities?
Yeah, so that's one answer. Would you rely on charities? No. So that's part of the answer. There's a much better answer, and it's not theoretical, it's real, and it was revealed by this guy at a TED Talk in Newcastle. I'll stop this one probably about 15 minutes in, but just so you know I'm not completely crazy and this stuff is real.
Good afternoon, Newcastle. Malala. You've all heard of Malala. When her story is told, and when we hear of her work, a really important detail is curiously omitted. Malala, she was on her way to school, wasn't she, when she was famously shot by the Taliban. I bet most of you think the school she was going to was a government school, a public school, say international. It was not. It was a low-cost private school charging a couple of US dollars equivalent per month. It was set up by her father, and her father eventually became the president of an association of 400 low-cost private schools in the Swat Valley in Pakistan. And I first discovered this phenomenon, this extraordinary phenomenon of low-cost private schools 15 years ago when I was in Hyderabad, a city in south-central India. I was there, as Herb said, I was well known for private education. I was an expert on private education, but I was there raising funds for elite private schools, the Indian School of Business, IIIT. These were the schools that I was raising money for, and I felt dissatisfied because for whatever reason I felt my life should be about the poor. So one day I read in my rough guide to India that the slums of the old city were behind the Charminar, this Arc de Triomphe of southern India. So I went looking there, perhaps with a hunch about what I might find. And there, down one back street, down one alleyway, I found a school, a private school, in those days charging about $1 US a month. Then I found another, and soon I was part of a meeting with a federation of 500 of these low-cost private schools. I talked to parents. I met mostly Muslim mothers in the old city of Hyderabad. I said, well, why are you sending your children to private school? You have to pay a couple of dollars a month, and the government school is free. The government school, you get free lunch, maybe free books. And mother after mother told me, the teachers don't turn up in the government schools. The teachers, if they do turn up, they don't teach to get our children to do chores. Or in the government school, our children are abandoned. So I went to see one of the government schools. It was a very nice building. I went with the district education officer, and he was remarkably candid to me. He said, today, James, there are just 2 teachers present in the school. There should be 7, but there are just 2 today. Every day, there are just 2 teachers. I went into a classroom with 130 kids, bright-eyed, sitting on the floor amongst the mosquitoes, doing nothing. So pleased to see a stranger come and greet them, doing nothing, and I saw what those mothers were saying about the abandonment of these children, waiting, and contrast that with what was happening in the private schools. So I went back to Washington, D.C. I was doing consultancy for the International Finance Corporation, the private arm of the World Bank. I went back to Washington, D.C. really animated. I said, look, there's something amazing going on in the slums in Hyderabad. People said, calm down, calm down, dear. You've seen maybe one or two businessmen ripping off the poor. I thought, businessmen ripping off the poor? I've seen people running sports days and science fairs on their weekends. How can that be the case? So I managed to get funding from the John Templeton Foundation. I was determined to see what was going on, and went to places like Makoko, this shanty town built on stilts into the dark waters of the Lagos Lagoon. We went looking there. I'm driving over the bridge here, looking down, asked my guide. He said, it's too dangerous to go there. You can't go there. So the next day, I took my colleague down there, and we went down there.
It's really alright, isn't it? And then coming here.
And the tree with French pastry.
Hi. Hello. Bye. Bye.
Once a minute.
Can I do what? Kennedy Private School.
Yeah.
Just the school.
So going into that shanty town on canoes, finding children, asking that little girl Sandra, where does she go to school? KPS, she says. What does KPS mean? Kennedy. Kennedy what? Kennedy Private School. And there it was, not Kennedy like the American president, Kennedy, a Nigerian word. One of 32 low-cost private schools in that shanty town alone. We went to Nairobi, to Kibera, one of the most notorious slums in Africa, in fact. And in the days before we started this work, see Frank there, where does he go to school? People would assume a government school, or he's out of school. But in actual fact, follow him into the slum there, and you'll find he too is at a low-cost private school, one of nearly 100 in the slums. And even in remote rural China, I thought I'd met my nemesis here. I went there looking for low-cost private schools. I went with one of my doctoral students there, Liu Chang, now a professor at Beijing Normal University. We went asking people. We had to abandon a car. We went into the mountains of Gansu province, traveling for 2 days. And at the very end of this, seeing people harvesting as they've done for hundreds of years through narrow gorges, we found our low-cost private school.
Apparently that's a good place to stop. So, there's lots of evidence now, but when I first found this guy, James Tooling, he had sent out a bunch of researchers from various universities in poorer countries to find these schools, and they all came back and said they don't exist. He said, well, did you check properly? Because I've actually found some in a place where you tell me they don't exist. And they said, oh, but they can't possibly exist. They're poor, why would they spend money on education? They don't even have the money. And so Sherry said, well, go out and check again, and they found them. And they since found thousands and thousands of schools and places where economists would say they can't possibly exist. Some of them run for profit. Some of them are basically groups of parents that set up a company, so they're not for profit, they just reinvest. Some of them are charitably based. Some of them have supporters from overseas. Does it work? Well, according to his research so far, the results are better than at the government schools. They do outperform on the national tests. There's a huge backlash already, especially in India, from the government, trying to shut down these schools, again, because they're profiting from education, which is unethical. This is probably the story that really made me turn into becoming an anarcho-capitalist. We'll get to why in a second. But if even children in the poorest parts of the world are already getting a private education, and it's better, assuming that's true, obviously I don't know for sure, it's impossible to know whether he's telling the truth and whether his research is real, all that sort of thing. But assuming it's true, then that's got to be the last sort of bastion of privatising or allowing private competition, as I said at the beginning. It's just showing that the private sector really does solve these problems, not just theoretically. It's doing it every day in the places where economists say it's impossible. Even economists from those countries getting told to look at these schools say they don't exist without checking. So I mentioned the charter cities in India. They used to be the best example of the types of arguments that I'm making. They used to be very famous at creating some new ones. There's one that was proposed in Honduras. What tends to happen is, again, the government comes in and takes over once things get pretty prosperous, once things were running very well, which has been a big disappointment for the libertarian community. But there's lots of great quotes. Remember, The Guardian's a very left-wing newspaper in Britain, and there's quotes like, if a street lamp breaks in one of the charter cities, a private technician will come and fix it the next day. If the government were in charge, we could be waiting for a month or more. In the western state of I can't pronounce, there's a huge push to expand charter cities. Once again, I don't think those things are going to work out very well in the end, because it's just going to get taken over by the government. The government in the end does still have power. The people who push charter cities, I think Milton Friedman's grandson's one of them, and then was it Paul Romer, one of the most famous economists in the world. They basically say it's like creating a Hong Kong or a Shenzhen. Not that long ago, nobody would have known what Shenzhen was. Now most Australians do know. And the reason it boomed was because it followed very close to a charter city model. Almost no taxes, privatise everything. They come up with some weird solutions though. It sounds like chaos to us. So for example, rubbish is pretty straightforward, right? You pay a company to pick up the rubbish once a week. That's probably what the government's doing anyway. But there's things like sewage. How can a private charter city build a sewage system? And the answer is they do it in a lot of strange ways, and it's not the same system throughout the city. So for example, parts of this particular city that was covered by The Guardian does have like a pretty typical sewage network. And parts of it, especially the high-rise buildings, they'll use a septic tank that gets emptied in the middle of the night by a big truck and drives out and dumps the waste. So they're all doing their own thing, which is less than ideal. It's pretty efficient to have pipes and run on the same network. The question is whether the private sector could make that happen in the end. I think it could. I think it would come up with the best possible solution over time, but obviously it's not perfect. So we heard a little bit about the Free Market Roadshow. I was the backup speaker pretty much for 3 months of touring around Europe. I think I went to about 35 cities, about 30 countries with a 1-week break, so it was almost a new city every day. And whenever someone's flight was cancelled or something like that, I was the backup speaker. And I'd give a version of this speech, which started out in like one little speech card, just a list of examples of what made me become an anarcho-capitalist, with the lighthouse example and the schools example and things like that. That's where the speech started. And what I discovered on that tour was something that even surprised me, which was that in every place they had the private sector providing something that in all the other places they thought was impossible for the private sector to provide. So in Australia, the example is air traffic control. Our air traffic control system is privatised. You say that to an American, they have a meltdown. Right? You should see the coverage that Trump is getting right now for suggesting to privatise the air traffic control system. In Georgia, they privatised the police force because it was too corrupt, so they decided to get a company to do it instead. In Tenerife, the water system was fully private, always has been. They used to drill into the side of the volcano when water comes out. Why do you need government to have a water system? What are some other examples? There's that's on my list of examples. And then in Athens, that's a photo of me and one of the other speakers, one of the organisers, outside the Occupy Athens tent city, which is, I think, probably still there. It was just long after the Occupy Wall Street movement got started, and they sort of stuck around in this particular square with their tents, and we set up our anarcho-capitalist Free Market Roadshow sign. We didn't do it fully because we thought we might get beaten up if they realised it was coming. So people in these places, especially the Eastern European ones, they're not all turning to like the Occupy Wall Street type of mentality. They're really thinking about these issues. And a good example of that was in Moldova, which I think the Moldovan Tourism Authority's slogan is the cheapest place in Europe. There was no currency exchange at the airport. That's how dodgy this place is. So the big issue of our conference there for the Free Market Roadshow, the topic that we were all supposed to talk about, was the free trade agreement that was proposed with the EU. The Moldovans wanted the free trade agreement. And I had two huge economists sitting either side of me, and they were Russian. Now, in Eastern Europe, Russians have a big influence. And not everybody likes it, and some people will think it's the right thing. So it was a really awkward situation. And the first economist got up and spoke about how wonderful this trade agreement with the EU was going to be. And then I for two reasons. You can drive over the border in Land Rover, and you have a lot of money if you live on the border because you can smuggle. And they've probably all got a relative who does this. It's probably their biggest career choice, either leaving the country or becoming a smuggler. So they knew what I was saying, they understood it, and they understood what was going to happen. And they certainly weren't going to say anything about it in front of the Russian economists, but they did say a lot to me and have since. So all through this free market roadshow tour, there was lots of things that I would learn from them. And I'd had to keep adding to my list of examples of things being private, where people say it's impossible for that to be privatized. But now we're going to get to the really extreme ones. A legal system. Can you privatize a legal system? So this one's a historical one again. Our law in Australia actually comes from a privatized legal system that used to exist. That's the source of the way we do things in the legal system. It was called the Lex Mercatoria. The common law system is based on that. It was a legal system that existed in the late Middle Ages. One legal system for the Mediterranean all the way up to Britain. So a few years this way. Right? Courts, enforcement, the law, everything private. Everything was privately done. You know why? Because they didn't trust governments. Back then there were a lot of small governments all trying to extract duties from merchants, and the merchants said, well, stuff this, how are we going to make agreements? We're going to come with the law and our own court system. And the British, because it's a trading nation, basically adopted the rules that had emerged, and that's what created our maritime and commercial law. And then that's why we have the criminal code, criminal system very separate from the civil system, commercial law today. I've got no idea if the private sector would do a particularly good job at having a legal system today, but based on all the other things that we've investigated, I'm starting to believe it could. We also have a lot of mediation courts now, which are effectively privatized legal systems. They just enforce the contract. Bitcoin has now the contracts that complete themselves. What's it called? Anyone know? Self-fulfilling contracts. So you can encode in your contract using Ethereum that once the contract is fulfilled, the payment happens automatically. So that's an example of a privatized legal system. How many different banks issue money in the UK? Quiz question. Quiz. Yeah. Two. Which are?
To the Bank of England and Standard Chartered.
Standard Chartered doesn't, as far as I know.
They still have some notes.
Oh, really?
Standard. Yeah.
I think there are about 5.
5? Can you name any of them?
Bank of England.
The accent gives you away.
Bank of Scotland. I think because there are quite a few different banks. There's Lloyd's. I don't know. Sorry.
You don't know?
Yes.
So there's 10. About 10. There's 6 of them. Kent was in the UK. So the Isle of Guernsey, Guernsey, Jersey, Isle of Man have 1 each. Northern Ireland has about 3. Scotland has 3, and then the Bank of England. Why is that the case? Why does Britain have about 10 different note issuing banks? One of them's Danske Bank. Changing. Which Danske means, where's Eva? Eva's gone. No, I think it means Denmark. Anyway, why? Why is there 10 different note issuing banks? Because money used to be privately run. Each bank would issue its own currency. It's called free banking. It's not a controversial topic. Okay. For some strange reason, Scotland kept, and Northern Ireland kept, the various different banks issuing their own currency. It's all equivalent to the Bank of England pound now. It's all the same. You can exchange them, you can spend them exactly the same. If you try and exchange a Scottish pound, like a Royal Bank of Scotland banknote, the currency exchange at Perth Airport, you're going to have a problem. They're going to look at you like you're a complete nutcase, and they're going to think you're a counterfeiter, and they're going to detain you for about half an hour until they Google what a Scottish pound is. Especially because you've got 3 different note issuing banks in Scotland, so I had 3 different banknotes. So they thought I was doing something really weird, right? But they're all the same. Okay, I used to carry the notes around with me for this type of situation, for this type of speech. I don't anymore, but I've got some pictures for you. So the banks in Scotland are Clydesdale Bank, Bank of Scotland, Royal Bank of Scotland. I remember those because I've used them myself because my mum used to live there. So this system used to work quite well. So well that it was profitable, and you can guess what happened. The government took it over because you're making money out of something that's like an institution that the government should control. Money should control that government. Of course, we know what governments do to money. They print it like mad, inflate it out of existence so that they can finance their wars. Okay, governments used to have to rely on bankers to have a war, right? So wars can get out of hand, and there were less of them, and usually the person who won the war was the one who maintained the confidence of their bankers. That's how the biggest banking families became so wealthy. The history of money, how am I going for time? 7 minutes. Let's do a little bit of history of money. So, why is the pound sterling called the pound sterling? It's a pound of sterling silver. You used to be able to redeem every pound for a pound of sterling silver at the bank. That's where it's got the name. They converted to gold like the time of Henry VIII or even later than that. So the idea was that it was basically a certificate of deposit. That's why it's called a deposit today. So you go to the bank with the banknote that says £10 from Clydesdale Bank, and you say, I want my silver or I want my gold, and they have to redeem it. Right? It was then the case when the government took it over as well, but less and less gold backed more and more money. Okay? If a private company does that, everyone starts a bank run and says, hey, I want my money, I want my gold. If the government does it, you can't get away with it. What can you do? You can just say no, which is what country after country did. They went off the gold standard or off the silver standard. And that allows them to print so much money today with no accountability for it. One of my jobs at the moment here in Australia, which I just signed on to, is to write the financial advice based on someone called James Ricketts, who's basically predicting that gold is going to come back again into the currency system. Somehow we're going to have gold-backed money. Because at the moment we've got central banks printing a load of money, and eventually it's not going to be worth very much unless they back it by gold again. And he's got some amazing contacts and a lot of great information about just what's going to happen and why. If you're interested, his name's Jim Ricketts, and he's not just famous in economic circles and investing circles.
Sorry, what was that name?
Jim Ricketts. He was the lead negotiator for the 1970s hostage crisis on an aeroplane. They took the hostage, first aeroplane back to terrorism. So that's a little bit about the history of money, but again, this is called the free banking era. If you want to research it, it's a great one, a very interesting one. And there's lots of funny stories. I think Adam Smith, the economist, the famous economist, got caught out by a bank run under the Scottish free banking system. According to some researchers, people trusted this banking system so much that it held a 1% fractional reserve, which basically means for every pound issued, they only had 1 penny's worth of silver or gold backing it. So there was very rarely a bank run. People trusted bankers to inflate like mad. Some people say they should have to have exactly the amount of gold relative to how much money they issue. Some people say fractional reserve banking is okay. It's okay to only have some gold. It's one of the big debates in anarcho-capitalist societies. So are you guys starting to see a pattern here? Every time we come up with an issue that says only the government could provide whatever it is, I come up with a historical example or a current example or a theory or something that explains, well, actually the private sector could do well. We think, we believe, possibly, maybe. You don't have to agree with them, you might agree with some of them, you might have to do more research. I hope you do. These are just some of the examples that anarcho-capitalists like to point out. If someone comes to you now, this is my question really, if someone comes to you now and says, but how would the private sector solve air pollution? How would the private sector solve saving the whales? How would the private sector do X? Are you going to say, well, I've got no idea, therefore the government should do it? Or are you going to say, I've got no idea, but probably the private sector could do a better job, because I've been proven wrong about the last 5 or 6 issues as well. And that's what distinguishes anarcho-capitalists. So I've got no idea how the private sector would solve even the issues that I've explained to you, lighthouses, rubbish roads, all of these things. There'd probably be ways that I couldn't even imagine. Anyway, that's not where the debate is. the debate is whether there's some sort of reason why the private sector keeps on doing better on the issues that we do know enough about. And that's how I've arrived at being an anarcho-capitalist. It's not by understanding their theories or believing in their beliefs or thinking it sounds nice or freedom or something like that. It's just that I've been proven wrong so many times. Like, the idea that private schools exist for the world's poor already, and they already outcompete the government when government schools are free, that's happened to me over and over again on so many issues that eventually I've just gone, I give up. I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I'm willing to give the private sector the benefit of the doubt rather than the government. Now, anarcho-capitalists are very good at explaining why the private sector does better than the government. They have lots of good theories, lots of intricate ways of understanding and explaining it, but no one's ever persuaded by it. Because the conclusion is outrageous, right? Getting rid of government schools, getting rid of roads built by governments, it sounds terrible. No one's ever persuaded if you say that to someone. But if you say someone issue by issue and they've proven wrong slowly and steadily over time, as I hope you'll be, that eventually you start to give the private sector the benefit of the doubt. It's just what works. So that's how I've come to where I am, but I still sort of owe you the explanation of what's an anarcho-capitalist. So an anarcho-capitalist is an anarchist, but we had the word stolen off us by people who like throwing rocks. And they have some really weird economic theories that are really similar to communism and socialism. So they believe in the Labour theory of value, which means something's value is determined by how much effort you put into it. And I can tell you that's just not true. If I tried to paint a painting, it would not be worth anything, regardless of how much effort I put into it. An anarcho-capitalist believes in the subjective theory of value. So value is in the eye of the beholder, is the easiest way to understand it. So if you exchange something with someone, if the value of that thing of the things you're exchanging were the same, why would you bother swapping them? Each person has to value what they're getting more than what they're giving. Otherwise, there's no reason to exchange. Right? And the only way that can be true is if you perceive value differently. Right? If everybody values everything differently. Also, they value different things differently over time. So what I want one day, I don't want the next. And that's sort of the basis of all economics for an anarcho-capitalist. The idea that we all see things differently, and thereby by exchanging and trading we can make each other better off. Everybody else believes in the value of something as a particular set amount. That objectivists argue that it's based on the price. So the price, whatever someone paid for it, that's what it's worth at that time. And why would they have paid for it? If that's the value, that you wouldn't bother making the effort of going to the exchange. The labour theory is how much effort you put into it, and there's lots of other theories as well. There's something's worth based on the components of it that were put together, and lots of other weird theories of value. Anarcho-capitalists, the only ones who believe in subjective value. That's why they're so closely connected to lots of the books on the back shelf, the Austrian School of Economics. They're pretty much the people who came up with subjective theory of value. They're the people whose theories I use when I'm writing my financial advice. You might like to think of anarcho-capitalism as just consistent libertarianism. Right? So, for example, Milton Friedman was very libertarian, apart from one issue, money. He believed we should have a central bank that issues money and controls the interest rate. Now, if he applied his own theories, which he applied to the minimum wage laws and rent control and many other things, if he applied those theories to money, he would have realized it's exactly the same thing. Controlling the interest rate is no different to controlling the minimum wage law or the rent control law. Right? It creates shortages and surpluses of debt. And that's why we have financial crises. Right? If the government controlled the price of oranges, you'd have a shortage or a surplus of oranges based on whether the price is too high or too low. If the government controls the interest rate, you get a shortage or a surplus of debt. That's what a debt crisis is. It's a central bank created problem. So that's how why I say anarcho-capitalist is a consistent libertarian. One caveat, every anarcho-capitalist and libertarian has one issue that they're not a libertarian on. Mine's radio jingles, I would ban them. Everything else is fine with me. So you should think about which one's yours and be honest about it. And then you can argue with anarcho-capitalists about that, and that's good fun. So what are some anarcho-capitalist answers to the typical questions we face? Should gay marriage be legalised? Anyone want to guess what the anarcho-capitalist answer is?
Government shouldn't be involved in marriage at all.
Yeah,
Private contracts.
Why is the law involved in marriage? Why is the government making laws about marriage? What a bizarre idea. Should drugs be legalized? That one's gone mainstream. It used to only be an anarcho-capitalist argument to say everything should be legalized. How do you save the whales? You sell them. You sell them. Yeah, that's one option. But the argument I'm making more is, so there's a reason why we have cows and no buffaloes. It's because it's legal to own a cow and a buffalo. So if all of the people in the world who want to save whales got together and formed a company to buy all the whales in the world, they would probably outbid the people who want to kill them and farm them and sort of
Property rights.
property rights. Yeah.
Are there any seasteading efforts going on?
Yeah, I
these
don't know
days?
too much about the seasteading ones.
Yeah.
They're very libertarian, not anarcho-capitalists. But yeah, that was a big hope, and that was Milton Friedman's grandson, I believe, as well. I haven't looked into them for a long time. Again, whenever these things work out well, the government finds a way in. We'll talk a bit more about the practical side in a second. So here's like a map of ideologies and where they are on the little graph that I've created. On the y-axis, it's all about control, government, coercion. We say coercion because usually libertarians say force, like violence, but we don't really have a problem with violence as long as you're agreeing to have a fight. You can do what you want. Right? Coercion is sort of like you didn't agree to it and you're still getting beaten up by the police. Freedom, cooperation, I put cooperation there specifically because anarcho-capitalists are not against groups. They're just against you forcing someone else to be part of your group. Whether it's because you've drawn an imaginary line around you called a border, or any other reason, you should not be able to force someone else to be part of your group. It has to be voluntary, it has to be cooperative. On the x-axis you've got collectivism, which is the welfare of the group is more important than the welfare of the individual. And you've got individualism, which is the individuals who do whatever they want regardless of the effect on everyone else. So you've got communism, fascism, and socialism. Lots of control, and it's all about the country, or the workers, the proletarians, whatever it is. Conservative social policy is kind of collectivist, they like religion and things like that, but the economics is fairly individualistic. That's why they're allied with libertarians on that one. So, a kibbutz, anyone not know what a kibbutz is? It's like a commune of Jewish people that live together and work together and share lots of things. They're kind of dying out or not doing too well. You've got a hippie commune, very collectivist. They're all about the group and sharing everything. But they don't force people to stay there. That's what makes kibbutzes and communes unique. That's why anarcho-capitalists have no problem with them, right? Because they're not forcing anyone to stay. Same with religion. An anarchist is very collectivist and believes the world would be a place where we all hold hands and get along very well if we didn't have a government. An anarcho-capitalist says that's not likely to work, but doesn't have a problem with it. Objectivism, if anyone likes Atlas Shrugged and Fountainhead and things like that, they're very individualist and they don't really like government. It's like they sort of half agree with anarcho-capitalists and half not, because anarcho-capitalists don't really care whether you want to be individualist or not, just don't force me into your way of thinking. Libertarians, almost anarcho-capitalists. So anarcho-capitalist is really wide there at the bottom because, for example, anarcho-capitalist doesn't have a problem with family. Family is a very collective idea, but no one's forcing you. It's not a government state control measure. They do believe that collectivism doesn't work because of incentives. People get lazy if someone else is reaping the benefits. And that's why people tend to leave kibbutzes and hippie communes break down, because people realise that someone's sort of free ride. It's a version of the free ride problem. So government control is dangerous. You can't really have government control and individualism. It's almost impossible. Collectivism doesn't last, so anarcho-capitalists tend to be against it. Everybody leaves their family eventually. And sort of the consistent position is basically just no coercion, no government control of whatever it is you're doing. Sometimes a group is the right way to go. A particular type of company where everyone's an equal shareholder is a good idea sometimes. A type of company where you've got some really strong person who owns all the shares might be a good time for a different style of company. You can do what you want, just don't force other people using the government. Obviously, contracts should be upheld, so you can't force someone to perform a contract that they've agreed to. Bad argument. So if you're thinking this, you haven't really understood what I'm saying, which is fair enough, because I'm the one who's supposed to make you understand it. Why has nobody ever tried it if it's such a good idea?
No.
Why has nobody ever tried it?
Government makes too much money.
So we have tried it in lots of different areas, like the privatised legal system that existed around the Mediterranean, was set up by the merchants, or the charter cities. But I've never understood this argument. If someone went up to Aristotle and said, nobody's ever tried democracy, therefore it's a bad idea. Doesn't really make sense. Just the fact that we haven't tried it isn't a reason to not try it. When we haven't tried anything until we've tried it, it's a good thing. It goes for every good idea. Defending your borders. Again, you're defending them against another government. Now, I've got 3 citizenships, so I'm not supposed to. But and I went to international schools growing up for the most part. So, to me this argument is really confusing because I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I'm not saying Australia should abolish government. I'm not saying China should abolish governments. I'm not saying Germany should abolish governments. I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I don't care about your governments. I don't care about where you happen to have drawn the borders. Right? All of us should be becoming more and more anarcho-capitalist. Or would be better off if we all became anarcho-capitalists. There's actually a really cool science fiction book. Anarcho-capitalists tend to like science fiction. I came to this really late. I used to hate it because it allows them to dream about what the world would be like in an anarcho-capitalist society. And there's one particular book, I can't remember, and there's a scene in it where it's an alternative reality where what would have happened if America had been pretty much anarcho-capitalist or very libertarian. And the Nazis took over in Europe, just as happened in reality in history, and a bunch of people from America volunteered to go and fight in Europe, which happened as well to some extent. Now, part of anarcho-capitalist societies, the stereotype is that they will all own guns, right? Because they like to be able to protect themselves because the government isn't going to. So all these crazy anarcho-capitalists in this book go over to Europe very well armed, and they're not an army because there's no government, right? And so basically they can't surrender. And because they can't surrender and they're very disorganized, they're almost impossible to beat because they all fight off their own initiative. So if you can't retreat and you can't surrender, you don't know what everyone else is doing, you fight if you've bothered to go to Europe. And so this science fiction author has like lots of funny little stories about how this war occurs and how a libertarian self-defense force actually works quite well. And you can't divide it. You can't say we've beaten this army. There's just other people. It's a complete mess, and that governments don't deal well with that. And it just made me laugh at how anarcho-capitalists and libertarians just perceive the world so differently. They just got a completely different understanding of what works and what doesn't work. I missed 2. Who takes care of the poor? We kind of answered that one with the schools example. Again, and this is really important to understand, anarcho-capitalists rely on charity and rely on altruism for their ideal to work, to be functional. Everyone accuses them of being really hard-hearted because they think that they don't want to help the poor people because they're against the government doing it. What they're arguing is that the private sector could do a better job of helping the poor people through charity and things like that. I think this is a good example of one we already see every day. The government doesn't help homeless people, it gets the police to tell them to move along and harasses them. It's private people that are helping homeless people, usually. Also, it's a bit laughable to take someone's money away and then say, see, you're not giving money to the poor. And that's what the government's doing through taxes. So, good arguments against anarcho-capitalism. At what point is someone legally a person? What point should they be able to decide things for themselves? That one's usually socially decided, in my opinion. So, who cares about what the drinking laws are in Australia? Who drank before the drinking laws? Or the drinking age? Everyone. In Germany, the law is 16. Everyone drinks even earlier. These sorts of issues about when you come of age to do certain things are usually determined socially. Also, within Australia, the age someone will drink at will probably be determined by their family and their culture. It's really easy for us as Australians because it's Greek culture and Polish culture and Irish culture. They're going to have different ages. The point being that if someone's really responsible and growing up, then why can't they drink before the age of 18? It should be fine. Someone who's a bit of a mess probably don't want them to. So if you have the government dictate controlling things, it's going to give you a less good result. Governments re-emerge by choice. This is probably the best one, I think. People want governments. They really like them. That's not really something I can disagree with. And it leads to the next issue, which is that anarcho-capitalism is irrelevant because it's just not going to happen. The majority of people are never going to be anarcho-capitalists. The majority of people will never want governments abolished. It's not a realistic scenario, and that's completely true. If we lived in an anarcho-capitalist society tomorrow, like everything was gone, all the governments were gone tomorrow, I think they'll just come back. Which means we can
If you did have a anarcho society and a government came back though, would it not be as would they not be able to coerce you like the way they can now? If people voluntarily formed a government, they can't force you.
Yeah, exactly. That's the argument I'm trying to make. So better than mine. That's why I see an argument against anarcho-capitalism. That we have these governments for reasons because people want them. They like coercion. They like forcing us.
Yeah, but
completely take that one on the chin.
I think the fundamental question is, what is a government? I mean, historically, and this is where I think Hayek and his evolution of law and society is quite important because, in evolutionary terms, even troops of apes have a form of government. They have governance.
Yeah.
I think the problem today is government has become so aloof, so distant from the people who even a small group of people will impart some, they have some sort of council, because there's the governance that requires some oversight. It's the degree of accountability or the lack of accountability that I think is the biggest problem.
The issue I have with that way of seeing things is that you're thinking very geographically.
No.
With the border of location, so a council is like a location or an area. And what if you want to be governed by something else? You decide you're an anarcho-capitalist, but a very collective one. So you want to be part of a kibbutz, and you want to be governed by that. And that's a government, but you've agreed to sign on. The distinction is whether you can leave, to me. So all of the governments of the world, they stop you from leaving. You can't leave. You're stuck in their jurisdiction.
I see. Yeah,
you need their permission.
You've just fallen into the trap of defining government as a certain thing. I'm actually going prior to that.
Yeah.
So nothing you've said. I'm not seeing boundaries at all. Individuals, anarcho-capitalists and individuals have the right to interact cooperatively, non-coercively. That is, I would suggest, and I think Hayek would suggest, is a natural behaviour of humans. And Adam Smith would argue the same, I think, with theory of moral sentiments as well.
So where would you draw the line? Would a company with
companies
company
are
rules
interesting.
government?
See, Ronald Coase is brilliant in this because the nature of the firm is a brilliant exploration of why firms exist. In fact, I think Hayek also described in one book a free market it has islands of totalitarianism, and those totalitarian islands are firms.
Yeah. And so the question is whether you go into them voluntarily and whether you can leave them and under what terms. So usually the science fiction books that imagine the perfect anarcho-capitalist world have people signing on to different groups, and those groups provide things like safety and the legal system and all the things we look to for government. And people swap and change between the groups based on all sorts of reasons, usually what they get out of it. And then there's people who effectively live online with their life. That's how they choose to exist. And they're governed already by the rules in that online game. What's the life game? Something Life?
Second Life?
Yeah, Second Life or whatever it is. That's got rules and government. So yeah, you can change the definition of government and introduce some flexibility that way. The governments that we have using their definition of government, so national governments, I suppose you could call them, are what anarcho-capitalists have problems with. Usually because you can't leave, you can't choose to be part of their regime or not. Intellectual property, there's a big debate in anarcho-capitalists. Can you own an idea? Is it possible to own an idea? Some anarcho-capitalists say no. So for example, if someone develops a new drug or something like that, that's general property. Others say yes, because otherwise no one would develop the drug and so on. And it's a great debate, it's a current debate too. Abortion, Walter Block has a good theory on abortion. I don't know if it's held by all of the anarcho-capitalists, but he basically says it's the same law as trespass, same idea as trespass. You can invite someone in your home, but if you ask them to leave, you have that right to, regardless of the effect it has on them. I don't know what I think of that one. No idea. So, before we get to questions and a discussion, let me ask you, why do you hold your beliefs? Is it because what you're taught, or what sounds good, or what you think you believe is right? Or is it because of what works best, what the effects are of your belief? Do you care more about the intentions or the outcomes? Do you care about how things make you feel? Am I being a good person? Or is it about how the other person is affected by your actions based on your beliefs? So for example, foreign aid is a good ethical thing, but what if it does more harm than good? As I believe it does, I think it props up the people we try to stop and then have wars with. What if fair trade coffee actually ruins farmers' lives? I believe it does. What if having government schools actually makes educational outcomes worse for poor people? So if you begin to have doubts about whether what you believe leads to the outcome you want, then that's sort of what I'm trying to achieve. Just some doubt, some questioning. I'm not trying to convince you or change your mind. I'm trying to get you to think about, does what I believe really lead to what I want in the world? So I'm an anarcho-capitalist, not because it sounds good, it sounds awful. It sounds like misery and chaos and all sorts of other things. But I believe it would be the best possible world. All little parts of our lives, like cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, allow us to do lots of things. Silk Road allowed us to do lots of things. Now legalization's gone mainstream. So there's little sort of islands of good news. There's also islands where believing in these things will have red lights flashing, something's going to go wrong, like with the superannuation system and pensions and things like that. So it is useful. And the best thing about being an anarcho-capitalist is you can be very lazy. You can be very lazy, because if someone says to you, but who would build the roads? Who would build the schools? You know, I've got no idea. I just think someone would do it better than the government. So I'd like to finish on. Thank you very much. I can do one more little story if I have got time. T2. Should be only be about 5 minutes. Does anyone know what really happened on Thanksgiving? The original Thanksgiving. So, Thanksgiving story, the American mainstream version, is that these Puritans from Britain, they'd actually been kicked out of the continent because of their particular religious beliefs. They took a ship from Britain and landed in Plymouth Rock in America and founded a colony. And they were starving because they got bad weather, and collectivists always blame bad harvests on weather, by the way. It's always a big red herring. Anyway, they had some bad weather, and therefore they were starving, and the Indians, the Native Americans, helped them out with some food. And then miraculously, suddenly their farms all started working really well. So that's the official version. The real version, if you read the journal of the guy who was the leader of the expedition, was a little bit different. So they left, and they were financed by, I think, British bankers. And one of the rules that the British bankers had for financing, one of the conditions, was a common store. Common good and common store. Which basically means that everyone owns everything. 100% collective. Communist. Hardcore communist. Everyone owns everything, everyone shares everything. When you get there, everyone's equal. So they landed, and of course nobody bothered to work hard because everyone else shared in the benefits of their hard work. And so they were starving. And eventually it got so bad most of them had died, and the leader decided to breach the contract and abandon the common store requirement. And he assigned plots of land to each family or each person. And said you get to keep whatever you grow. And he assigned property rights to shovels and farming equipment and whatever. And suddenly they were fine. And the quote is like, overnight you could see pregnant women tilling the fields, and their children who'd been sick for months were suddenly digging holes and finding fertilizer and all this. And that was the founding of America, basically. That's why they're so free market, were for a while. That's the real story of Thanksgiving. It's an example of communism failing. And if you're really interested in these ideas, have a read at what's happening to agricultural policy in North Korea at the moment. It's the same story happening again.